Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 8408, the Bipartisan Aircraft Certification Reform Accountability Act today, because a U.S. commercial airplane manufacturer, and candidly, the Federal Aviation Administration, broke the public trust. 346 innocent people died on two Boeing 737 MAX airplanes in October 18 and March 19. Despite the crashes, both Boeing and FAA found that the certification of the 737 MAX was compliant with FAA regulations. It was compliant with regulations, yet 346 people died. I believe that shows that there are problems with the regulatory system that need to be addressed. Ranking Member Graves, Aviation Subcommittee Chair Larson, Aviation Subcommittee Ranking Member Graves, and I actively worked on this bill over a number of months. I think I can speak for all of us when I say our intent is to ensure a U.S. manufactured airplane never again crashes due to design issues or regulatory failures. The Boeing 737 MAX has been grounded since the second crash, that of Ethiopian Flight 302 on March 10, 2019. This has been the longest grounding of a transport plane in the history of commercial aviation, and will likely end this week when the FAA judges that Boeing's modifications to the deadly system that caused the crashes are sufficient. The FAA and Boeing have spent the last 20 months doing what they should have done before the 737 MAX ever entered service. So consideration of this bill is timely. There's a long litany of negligence, recklessness, corporate greed, particularly at the executive level, and errors in the design and certification of the 737 MAX that culminated in the crashes of Lion Air 610, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, and ultimately this legislation. I'm not going to go over all of the stunning acts and omissions within Boeing, the regulatory capture that prevented FAA from detecting and correcting those acts and omissions, because they've been laid bare in numerous reports since the accidents, including those of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, who recently concluded the longest and most comprehensive investigation in the committee's history with a nearly 250-page report on the technical and regulatory failures in this story. The Joint Authorities Technical Review, a team of U.S. and international safety regulators who assess the design and certification of the 737 MAX. The National Transportation Safety Board, a special committee convened by the Department of Transportation to evaluate the FAA's aircraft certification process with respect to the 737 MAX. The Indonesian National Transportation Safety Committee, which investigated the crash of Lion Air Flight 610, and the Ethiopian Civil Aviation Authority, which investigated the crash of Ethiopian Flight 302. Lion Air 610, Ethiopian Flight 302 crashed ultimately because of a system called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, which forced the airplane into dives with forces so great the pilots were physically unable to counteract them. Through numerous investigations, we know Boeing intentionally concealed the existence of MCAS in cases from the airlines and pilots, partly to save money on pilot training requirements and partly to avoid increased regulatory scrutiny by the FAA. Level B, non-simulator pilot training, was a design objective for the 737 MAX from the outset, according to Boeing's former chief project engineer. And as early as 2014, 2 years before the FAA made a pilot training determination, a Boeing press release and marketing materials declared this level of training for prospective 737 MAX customer airlines. In one case, they promised to pay a penalty of $1 million per plane to a purchaser if a higher level of training was necessary. We also know that Boeing's safety assessment with respect to MCAS was horribly incomplete. MCAS activated on both flights because of the failure of a tiny, fragile vein called an alpha vein protruding from the left side of the nose. The alpha vein measures the angle of attack between the airplane and oncoming air. When it failed, as these tiny, fragile veins are wont to do, it triggered a complex computerized response, which included a jarring stick shaker, which vibrates the columns so violently If you're holding on to it, your teeth are going to rattle to warn of a stall. Unrelated other cautions and warnings, and this plane has a primitive alert system, unlike all Boeing's made in the last 25 years, that doesn't prioritize things. And warnings that airspeed altitude is unreliable. More importantly, the MCAS system, an invisible system left out of the first manual or deleted from the first manuals distributed with the plane, forced the nose down repeatedly and inexorably toward the earth. Now, Boeing assumed pilots would respond to all that and apply the proper corrective procedure within 4 seconds. I would challenge most experienced pilots to sort through that blizzard of alerts in 4 seconds, not knowing of the existence of the system, to determine what's going on, apply the proper procedure. A Boeing test pilot in a simulator in 2012 couldn't do that, as the committee staff investigation revealed. It took that pilot more than 10 seconds to respond correctly and found the condition to be, quote, catastrophic, end quote, meaning the situation would have been unsalvageable. The plane would have crashed. The simulator crashed. And it did not share that information with the FAA or its MAX customers. But Boeing and the FAA never assessed the airplane level effects of an alpha vane failure, how it would trigger erroneous MCAS activation, how pilots would respond. Not that there wasn't plenty of opportunity within Boeing to stop and think about MCAS, the hazardous situations it would create. At one juncture, a Boeing employee was authorized by the FAA as part of the ODA organization designation authorization to determine the plane's compliance with FAA requirements, asked in an email if the airplane was vulnerable to a single alpha vane failure. The employee was given a summary assurance that MCAS was not vulnerable, but that assurance was incorrect. The eyes and ears of the FAA on the ground at Boeing left the FAA largely in the dark regarding issues that affected the airplane certification. We uncovered innumerable instances of similar missed opportunities in our investigation. The culture of profits at any cost within the company may well have been a factor in the failure to root out safety problems. According to a 2016 internal survey of similar Boeing employees who at the time were called authorized representatives of the FAA, 39% said they felt undue pressure from Boeing management to make decisions in the company's interest. And then there was the FAA, whose complacency rendered the agency virtually a non-presence in this story until then acting administrator Elwell grounded the airplane after the second one crashed and after virtually every other agency in the world had grounded these airplanes. The FAA was either unable or unwilling to conduct rigorous oversight of Boeing during the certification process. A Boeing employee wrote an internal email in 2015 that during a presentation of the 737 MAX, FAA officials were like, quote, dogs watching TV, end quote, and they hid the mention of MAX in 2 lines in a very lengthy presentation of MCAS. Throughout our investigation, we learned the FAA and Boeing separately performed an analysis after the first crash, that of Lion Air, which concluded that it left uncorrected the design flaw in the 737 MAX could result in as many as 15 future crashes. And despite the calculations in the agency's own transport airplane risk assessment methodology, or TARIM, the FAA let it continue to fly. In fact, the head of safety for the FAA came to my office in February after the first crash and said that was a one-off. There's no problem with this plane. But that report had been produced before he came to see me. Now, when we finally got him to a 7-hour recorded testimony, he said he never heard of anything that said 15 of the planes would crash. Well, what does the head of safety do at the FAA? Seriously. Now, here's the most outrageous indication of a broken safety culture within the very agency that's supposed to be the leading champion of strong safety cultures. In a recent survey of FAA aviation safety employees, 56% of those involved with certification activities believed there was too much external influence on the agency and that this influence was affecting FAA safety decisions. This is 25 years after the horrible crash of what was that? ValueJet in Florida, when I finally got the law changed to say that the FAA is not to promote and regulate in the public interest and safety. It is only to regulate in the public interest and safety, not to promote the industry. All of these factors alone and more, all part of a broken system that broke the public's trust, culminated in 2018 and 19 MAX accidents. And the bill we're considering today will fix that broken system. It requires the FAA to approve authorized representatives at all aviation manufacturers by examining their qualifications and character, so that when they're considering a proposed design, they will remember that public safety rests on their shoulders. Any person who interferes with an authorized representative performance of his or her critical duties on behalf of the FAA would be subject to civil penalties going forward. It also imposes civil penalties for a manufacturer's failure to disclose the details of a system like MCAS that manipulate flight controls without direct pilot input, and for a manufacturer's delivery of an airplane that does not conform to an FAA-approved design. The bill requires 2 FAA rulemakings that together will require manufacturers to provide the agency with thorough assessments measuring the risks created by changes to existing aircraft designs, so FAA can ascertain whether a manufacturer has sufficiently minimized any given risk. The bill requires FAA to hire more staff to rigorously review designs, authorizes enough funding for 100 of them. It also requires the FAA to implement a non-punitive voluntary safety reporting system for FAA employees to report safety concerns, prohibits agency officials from talking with manufacturers about formal objections to FAA career employees' decisions unless publicly disclosing information about those communications. And it extends to manufacturers' employees the same whistleblower protection that apply to airline employees today, and much more. I want to make it clear that this bill is not meant in any way to interfere with the victims or their families' access to the judicial system and all available remedies when tragedies occur. Compliance with the provisions of H.R. 8408 will not adversely affect any existing remedies available to families of the Boeing victims and any other future victims under state, federal, statutory, or common law. Families who've already suffered tragic loss must be able to seek compensation when their loved ones are injured or killed in aircraft crashes due to negligence or other wrongdoing. The 346 sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers who died on Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Flight 302 placed their trust in a broken system. Today, we take the next big step toward fixing that system. I thank Ranking Member Graves, Aviation Subcommittee Larson, Subcommittee Ranking Member Graves for their partnership in advancing this legislation. I look forward to continuing to work with them and our Senate colleagues, and hopefully we can get it enacted into law this year. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Oregon reserves. The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.